The return to Moria was a silent, grim affair. Darth Vader, the Iron Lord, strode back into his mountain fortress, his presence a vortex of cold, controlled fury that sent his goblin legions scrambling to their knees. He had failed. At the very moment of his prize's capture, he had been thwarted by the interference of the wizard and the wraith. The ring had slipped through his grasp. His patience, a tool he had wielded with the same precision as his lightsaber, was at an end. He stood in the great forge-lit expanse of the 21st Hall, his new throne room. Gothmog, his goblin lieutenant, groveled on the floor before the dais, not daring to look up at the silent black figure. The air itself seemed to crackle with the weight of its master's displeasure. For days, Vader had stood in silent meditation, his will a coiled serpent, his mind processing the failure and formulating a new final strategy. The hunt was over. The time for subtlety, for shadowing the ring-bearer, for using others as unwitting pawns was finished. He had played the game of whispers and shadows, and it had cost him the prize. Now, he would play the only game he had ever truly mastered, the game of overwhelming, absolute force. He would no longer wait for the ring to come to him. He would march on the lands of the enemy. He would tear down their fortresses, and he would take the ring from its master's very hand, whether that master be the Dark Lord Sauron or the hobbit who foolishly carried his burden. Gothmog, Vader's voice boomed, the sound not of anger, but of a cold, terrifying finality. "My lord," the goblin rasped, his face pressed to the stone. "Assemble the legions," Vader commanded. "All of them. The first, second, and third cohorts. Arm them with our finest plate and sharpest steel. The time for training is over. The time for conquest has begun. We march." Gothmog's head snapped up, a look of shocked, terrified confusion on his brutish face. "March, my lord? Where? To the lands of the elves? The dwarves?" "No," Vader stated. "We march on Mordor." The goblin lieutenant froze, his mind unable to process the sheer suicidal audacity of the command. To march on the Black Land, the domain of Sauron, the power that had haunted their race for thousands of years? It was unthinkable. "Sauron is a relic," Vader continued, his voice a low, contemptuous growl. "A coward who hides behind an eye. He believes he is the only power of darkness in this world. I will disabuse him of this notion. I will march my army to his very gate. I will be the anvil. The army of the West will be the hammer, and between us, the Black Land will be broken." It was a strategy of breathtaking arrogance and brutal logic. He would use the inevitable, final, desperate assault of the men of the West as a diversion. While Sauron's attention was fixed on the glorious, futile charge of Aragorn's army, he, Vader, would be the true threat, the dagger in the dark. "But the ring, my lord?" Gothmog dared to ask. "The prize?" "The prize is in Mordor," Vader replied, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I can feel it. Its power grows. It calls. Let the armies of men and orcs slaughter each other at the Black Gate. Their war is a meaningless sideshow. My war is for the ring itself. I will find the halfling, and I will take what is mine." His rage, a thing he had kept banked like the coals of his forges, was now being channeled into a singular, all-consuming purpose. He would no longer be a third power, a shadow in the mountains. He would be the storm. He would be the end. He would be the one true master of this world. The fury of the Iron Lord was about to be unleashed. In the court of the fountain in Minas Tirith, a different, far more desperate council was being held. The city was saved, but the victory on the Pelennor fields was a hollow one. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Sauron's might was diminished but not broken, and the ring-bearer, their one true hope, was somewhere in the black, ash-choked land of Mordor, alone. Gandalf the White stood before Aragorn, now crowned King Elessar, and the lords of Gondor and Rohan. His face was grim, his eyes holding the wisdom of one who has seen the abyss and returned. "Frodo lives," he began, his voice a quiet certainty in the tense hall. "I can feel it. He has passed beyond my sight, but he is not yet taken. He struggles towards the fire. But the eye of Sauron is now bent upon his own land. He searches. He knows the ring is within his grasp. Frodo cannot escape his sight for long." A mood of profound despair settled over the council. "Then we have failed," said Eomer of Rohan, his voice heavy. "We cannot march into Mordor itself. We do not have the strength." "We do not have the strength to win a war," Gandalf corrected him. "But our goal is not to win. Our goal is to lose, gloriously. We must draw the eye. We must pull his entire unwavering attention away from his own land, if only for a day. We must give Frodo the one thing we can, a chance, shrouded in darkness. The plan was laid bare. It was a suicide mission, a final, desperate feint. They would gather what was left of their strength, the pitifully small army of the West, and march on the Black Gate of Mordor. They would present themselves as an arrogant, foolish challenge, a threat so direct and so insulting that Sauron could not possibly ignore it. "He will empty his land to crush us," Aragorn said, his voice a low, grim acceptance. "He will believe the ring is with us, with the new king of Gondor. He will not look for a creeping hobbit in the shadows of his own mountain." But a new, cold variable haunted their council. "What of the third power?" a lord of Gondor asked, his voice trembling slightly. "The Iron Lord of Moria. His armies have been sighted moving south. If we draw Sauron's gaze, do we not simply clear the path for this new darkness to claim the ring for himself?" The question hung in the air, a terrible, unanswerable dilemma. They were caught in an impossible three-way game of chess, and any move they made seemed to benefit one of their two great enemies. Gandalf's face was a mask of weary resolve. "That is the gamble we must take," he admitted. "We cannot fight two Dark Lords at once. We must trust in Frodo and Sam, and we must trust that the destruction of the One Ring, the source of Sauron's power and the amplifier of the Iron Lords, will be enough to change the balance of the world." The decision was made. They would march. The departure of the army of the West was not a glorious, triumphant affair. It was a somber, funereal procession. 7,000 men, the last remnant of the pride of Gondor and Rohan, marched from the gates of the White City. They did not sing songs of victory. They marched in a grim, determined silence, their faces set, their hearts filled with the cold courage of men who were going to their own certain deaths. Aragorn rode at their head, the banner of the White Tree, a lonely, hopeful symbol in a world of gray. He was a king, leading his first, and likely his last charge. He was marching not to claim his kingdom, but to sacrifice himself for it. It was the ultimate test of the kingship that had been so long denied him, and as they marched towards the desolation of the Black Land, they could only pray that their sacrifice would be enough. In the highest chamber of the Barad-dûr, the great eye of Sauron burned with a triumphant, focused malice. The reports had flooded in from his spies, from the few Nazgûl who still patrolled the borders. The fools of the West were marching on him. The new, self-proclaimed king of Gondor, the heir of Isildur, was leading a pathetic, ragged army to the Black Gate itself. The sheer, unbelievable arrogance of it was almost comical. After the defeat on the Pelennor fields, a defeat Sauron saw as a temporary, costly setback, they were now throwing the last of their strength away in a single suicidal gesture. Sauron, a master of deceit, and a being of immense calculating intelligence, saw the move for what it was, a feint, a desperate, hopeless attempt to draw his attention. And he laughed, a silent, psychic laugh that echoed in the minds of his servants and made the very foundations of his dark tower tremble. They thought him a fool. They thought he would fall for such a simple, obvious trick. He knew the ring was not with them. He had felt it, a faint, pure, and agonizingly close presence, somewhere deep within the borders of his own land. The hobbit was here. The prize was here. And these fools were marching to their own execution, a welcome if irrelevant distraction. He would grant them their wish. He would give them the battle they so clearly desired. He would make an example of this king and his army that would be remembered in tales of terror for the next 1,000 years. His will, a thing of absolute, crushing power, surged forth from the Dark Tower. It was a single, galaxy-spanning command to every living evil thing within his domain. Empty the land. Leave no fortress guarded. Leave no pass unwatched. All forces to the Morinnon. All of my strength. All of my hate. Annihilate them. Leave nothing but dust and a memory of their folly. The Black Land came to life. From the great pits and armories of Gorgoroth, new legions of orcs, tens of thousands strong, marched forth. From the eastern lands of Rhûn and Khand, armies of fierce barbaric men, the Easterlings and the Variags, who had sworn allegiance to the Dark Lord, marched west. Great lumbering siege trolls, their hides as thick as stone, were roused from their slumber. The land of Mordor, which had been a sprawling network of garrisons and patrols, was being emptied. Every last soldier, every last beast, every last drop of Sauron's military might was being consolidated and sent north to the Black Gate. His great eye, which had been a sweeping, searching gaze, now turned inward. Its full, undivided attention was now fixed on the north, on the approaching army of men. He watched them come, his mind already savoring their destruction. He was a master player in the great game, and his opponent had just moved all of his pieces into a perfect, inescapable checkmate. In his arrogance, in his absolute certainty of victory, he made his first and last strategic error. He was so focused on the glorious final slaughter at the Black Gate that he failed to notice the two small, crawling figures on the slopes of Barad-dûr. He had dismissed them, their presence now so close, so deep within his own power that they were lost in the noise like two tiny insects crawling on the skin of a giant. And he was so focused on the enemy before him that he failed to notice the second, colder, and far more dangerous enemy that was now creeping in from behind. The board was clear, the way was open. The final race to the fire was about to begin, and the master of the game was looking the wrong way. The land of Mordor was a vision of hell, a landscape crafted by a mind of pure, unrelenting malice. The air was a choking, toxic soup of ash and foul vapors, the sky a permanent, swirling vortex of black and blood-red clouds, lit by the angry, sullen glow of Barad-dûr in the distance. The ground was a treacherous carpet of razor-sharp slag and black, crumbling rock. This was the final leg of their journey, and for Frodo and Sam, it was a slow, agonizing descent into utter despair. The joy of their escape from the Tower of Cirith Ungol had been fleeting. Now, clad in the rough, ill-fitting armor of orcs, they were simply two more lost souls in a land that was built of hopelessness. Frodo was all but lost. The ring, now so close to the fires of its creation, was a thing of monstrous, unbearable power. It was no longer a weight on a chain. It was a physical and spiritual anchor, dragging him down into an abyss of paranoia and obsession. It was no longer a whisper in his mind. It was a constant, screaming chorus, showing him visions of himself as a great, terrible lord, the master of the eye, the ruler of all. He barely spoke. He walked in a hunched, shuffling gait, his hand constantly clutching the ring through his tunic, his eyes wide and haunted. He saw enemies in every shadow, betrayal in his only friend's face. It was Samwise Gamgee who was the true hero of this final, desperate chapter. His simple, unshakable gardener's love for his master was a shield against the land's despair, a small, warm, and utterly unbreakable point of light in the overwhelming darkness. He drove Frodo on, with a mixture of gentle encouragement and grim, stubborn resolve. He found them the last precious drops of water in their bottle. He shared the last of their lembas bread, though he himself was starving. "It's the ring, Mr. Frodo," he would whisper, when Frodo would collapse weeping to the ground. "It's trying to break you. Don't you let it. He's not going to win. We're going to see the Shire again, and there'll be songs written about you, about Frodo of the Nine Fingers." But the land itself was their enemy. Their orc disguises were a constant, chafing torment, the rough metal and leather rubbing their skin raw. The sharp, volcanic rock of the Gorgoroth plains cut through their hobbit boots, leaving their feet bloody and bruised. And the eye was a constant presence. They could feel it, a great, sweeping, malevolent gaze that searched the plains. They would freeze, flattening themselves to the ground, trying to make themselves one with the dead black rock whenever they felt its attention pass over them. They were saved, time and again, only by Sauron's own arrogance, his gaze now fixed on the greater, more obvious threat marching towards his gate. They were two insignificant specks, crawling across a vast, deadly chessboard, and the king had forgotten they were even in play. But their journey was not just a flight from the eye. It was a race. They knew with a certainty that went beyond reason that they were not the only ones seeking the mountain. Frodo could feel it through the ring. A cold, commanding, and utterly alien will was also drawing nearer, a presence that was as terrifying to him as Sauron's own. They saw the evidence of this new, terrible power. They came across the bodies of an orc patrol, slain not in a chaotic brawl, but with a cold, terrifying precision, each one cut down by a single searing blow. The sight filled them with a new kind of fear. It was not just the Dark Lord who wanted the ring. Another, perhaps even more terrible, was hunting them in this dark land. The journey was a slow, agonizing crawl towards a fiery, uncertain doom, a race against the failing of their own bodies, the breaking of their own minds, and the approach of not one, but two, great and terrible Dark Lords. The army of the West stood before the Black Gate of Mordor, a tiny, defiant island of 7,000 souls in a vast, desolate sea of slag and ash. Before them, the two towers of the Teeth stood like grim iron fangs, the gate a mouth ready to devour them. Aragorn, King Elisar rode at their head, his face a mask of royal grim resolve. Beside him was Gandalf on Shadowfax, his white robes a stark, almost painful beacon of light in the oppressive gloom. They had come to this dark place to die, and to buy the world a few more precious moments of hope. "Let the Lord of the Black Land come forth." Aragorn's voice rang out, a clear, noble challenge that was swallowed by the dead air. Let justice be done upon him. The great gate did not open. Instead, a tall black figure rode out to meet them. It was the mouth of Sauron, his face a horrifying, smiling mask of ancient evil. He taunted them. He showed them Frodo's mithril coat. He promised them an age of slavery and pain. His taunts were met with a defiant, cold silence. "We are not here to bargain with Sauron, the deceiver," Aragorn declared, his voice cutting through the emissary's lies. "We have come to see his justice done." With that he turned his horse and rode back to his army. The mouth of Sauron, his purpose failed. His face contorted in a snarl of pure hate, fled back to the gate. "The board is set," Gandalf murmured. "The pieces are moving." The great black gate of Mordor groaned open, and from it a tide of absolute, unending evil poured forth. It was an army that was not meant to fight, but to drown. 60,000 strong, a sea of black-armored orcs, their scimitars and spears a forest of jagged steel. Great, lumbering mountain trolls, their roars shaking the very ground. And from the east, the glittering, bronze-armored legions of the Easterlings, their faces hidden behind grim, insect-like masks. The army of the west was completely, utterly surrounded, a small circle of defiance on two low hills of slag. Sauron's will, a tangible, crushing weight of pure malice, descended on them, seeking to break their spirit before the first blow was even struck. But the will of the West held firm. They were here to die, and they would die with their faces to the enemy. "For Frodo!" Aragorn cried, his sword, Andúril, flashing with the light of the sun and moon. With a great, defiant roar, the army of the West braced for the impact. The battle was a cataclysm. It was not a contest of tactics or strategy. It was a simple, brutal equation of numbers. The first wave of orcs crashed against the shield walls of Gondor and Rohan, a wave of hate that was met by a wall of desperate courage. The fighting was savage, a maelstrom of screaming and clashing steel. Aragorn fought like a hero of the elder days, his blade a white flame, his presence a beacon of hope in the chaos. The sons of Elrond, Eladon and Elrohir, fought at his side, their elven blades a graceful dance of death. Éomer of Rohan was a berserker, his fury a match for any orc. But for every orc they cut down, 3 more surged forward to take its place. The circle of defenders grew smaller, the lines thinner. The trolls came, their great clubs shattering the shield walls, their immense strength unstoppable. Gandalf was a pillar of light in the darkness, his staff flashing, his spells of fire and light holding back the tide in his small sector of the battle. But even his divine power was a finite resource against such an endless sea of hate. This was their sacrifice. This was their gift to the ring-bearer, a glorious, beautiful, and utterly hopeless death, a final song of defiance against the dying of the light. And as they fought and died, they prayed to any god that might be listening that their sacrifice would not be in vain. While the glorious, doomed battle raged at the Black Gate, a second, far more insidious invasion of Mordor was taking place. It was a silent, tactical, and utterly unseen march, a ghost army moving through the shadows, its purpose not a glorious death, but a cold, efficient victory. Darth Vader had no interest in the army of the West or their suicidal feint. He had felt their approach, had seen their small, pathetic numbers, and had dismissed them as an irrelevance, a footnote in the true war that was about to be fought. He was a predator, and his senses were fixed not on the roaring lion at the gate, but on the small, wounded lamb that was crawling towards the heart of the mountain. He had led his own army from Moria, a legion 5,000 strong. But he did not bring them all into the Black Land. That would be crude, noisy, and inefficient. He chose a small elite force, 500 of his finest storm goblins, the survivors of the battle at the East Gate, the most disciplined, the most hardened, the most utterly terrified of his new soldiers. He did not march them towards the Morannon. That was the front door, and only fools used the front door when a back one was available. He led them north, into the high, desolate passes of the Ash Mountains, the Ired Lithui. These were treacherous, forgotten paths, haunted by creatures even the orcs feared. But Vader was a master of forgotten paths. The Force was his guide, a perfect, unerring compass that showed him the weaknesses in the world's defenses, the cracks in the mountain's armor. He found a pass, a narrow, winding gorge that was not on any of Sauron's maps, a secret way into the back of the Black Land. The march was a testament to the brutal effectiveness of his training. The storm goblins moved not with the chaotic, bickering noise of their kind, but in a dead, disciplined silence. They marched in a perfect single file, their black armor blending with the volcanic rock, their steps sure and silent. They were ghosts, a river of black iron flowing through the heart of the mountains. They encountered resistance, great spider-like creatures, the lesser children of Ungoliant, descended from the high cliffs. Vader's goblins did not break. They formed small, perfect shield circles, their crossbows firing disciplined volleys, while Vader himself moved among them, his lightsaber a crimson blur that carved the creatures of darkness apart. They moved with a speed that should have been impossible. They did not need to rest. Vader's will, a constant, oppressive and energizing presence in their minds, drove them onward. Fear was a more potent fuel than any food or water. They emerged from the mountains not at the Black Gate, but on the high, desolate plateau of Gorgoroth itself, miles to the south, with a clear, unobstructed view of their true objective. Barad-dûr, Mount Doom. Vader stood on a high, black ridge, his 500 elite soldiers arrayed in silent, perfect ranks behind him. He looked out across the ash-choked plains. In the distance to the north, he could see the faint, flickering lights of the great battle at the Morinnon, a meaningless, noisy distraction. Before him, the great fiery mountain smoked and rumbled, its peak a sullen, angry red against the black clouds. And he could feel it. The ring, it was there, close, so close. Its power was a roaring, triumphant song in his mind, a promise of his own imminent apotheosis. He had bypassed Sauron's army. He had bypassed the war of men. He had cut to the heart of the matter. A black arrow aimed at the one target that truly mattered. He began his final advance. A silent, dark king and his honor guard, marching on the throne room of the world. The plains of Gorgoroth were a landscape of pure, industrial despair. The ground was not soil, but a carpet of fine gray ash and sharp black slag that cut through the hobbits' worn-out boots. The air was a toxic, choking haze that burned their lungs and made their eyes water. Great belching fissures in the earth vented plumes of noxious yellow smoke. Frodo and Sam were deep in the heart of the enemy's country, and their journey was no longer a march but a crawl. Frodo was a ghost, a pale, emaciated figure, his large hobbit eyes wide with a mixture of madness and a terrible, soul-deep weariness. The ring's power was now absolute. It was a physical and spiritual torment, a monstrous weight that not only hung on his neck, but seemed to have sunk its claws into his very bones, his very soul. He no longer saw Sam as a friend. He saw him as a rival, a thief who coveted his precious. He would flinch away from Sam's touch, hissing, his hand flying to the ring, his mind a swirling vortex of paranoia and hate. It was Samwise Gamgee who carried them forward. The simple, stout-hearted gardener had become a figure of mythic, unwavering loyalty. His own body was screaming in protest. He was starving, he was thirsty, his feet were a bloody ruin. But his love for his master was a fire that the ashes of Mordor could not extinguish. He had given Frodo the last of their water. He had given him the last of their lembas. He himself was running on nothing but sheer, stubborn hobbit will. They reached the base of Mount Doom. It was not a mountain of rock and snow. It was a great, black, smoking slag heap, its sides a treacherous, shifting slope of loose ash and sharp volcanic scree. Frodo collapsed. "I can't," he gasped, his voice a dry, rattling whisper. "I can't go on, Sam." Sam looked at his master, at the pale, dying light in his eyes, and his heart broke. But he did not despair. He looked up at the vast, smoke-choked slope of the mountain, and his simple gardener's mind made a simple, heroic calculation. "I can't carry it for you, Mr. Frodo," he said, his own voice cracking with exhaustion and emotion. "But I can carry you." With a strength born of pure love, he lifted his master onto his shoulders. Frodo was a light, feather-light weight, his body wasted away by the ring's long torment. And Sam began to climb. Every step was an agony. The ash slid beneath his feet, carrying him back down for every 2 steps he took up. The sharp rock cut his hands and knees. The heat from the mountain's core radiated up through the ground, burning his already wounded feet. But he climbed. He was no great warrior, no king, no wizard. He was Samwise Gamgee, a gardener from the Shire, and he was carrying the fate of the world on his shoulders. He climbed, one slow, agonizing step at a time, his mind focused on a single, simple image: the green hills of his home, a pint of ale at the ivy bush, the smell of pipeweed and a friendly fire. He did not know that the world's great armies were clashing at the Black Gate. He did not know that a second, even darker lord was at that very moment ascending the other side of the mountain. He knew only one thing: his master had a task to do, and it was his job to get him there. Higher and higher he climbed, a small, stubborn, and utterly unbreakable point of light in the heart of a world-ending darkness. He was the truest of all the heroes of that age, and his final desperate act of love was the one thing that all the great powers of the world had failed to account for. Sauron's focus was a thing of terrible, singular intensity. His great eye, a vortex of fire and malice, was fixed upon the glorious, unfolding slaughter at the Black Gate. He watched as the army of the West was slowly, inexorably, being ground into dust beneath the weight of his legions. He savored their courage, their defiance, their inevitable, coming annihilation. But even in his moment of ultimate, arrogant triumph, he was not a fool. His vast, ancient consciousness was still attuned to the subtle currents of his own land, and he felt it. It was not the faint, crawling presence of the halflings. They were now so close, so deep within the aura of Mount Doom itself, that they were all but invisible to him. No, this was something else. A new feeling. A cold, disciplined, and utterly hostile will was moving through his lands with a speed and a purpose that was terrifying. The Iron Lord, Sauron's eye, for a single critical moment, wavered in its focus. It turned from the Black Gate and looked south, towards the fiery mountain. And he saw him, a single black figure, leading a small elite guard of his goblin soldiers, ascending the slopes of Orodruin with a relentless, unstoppable purpose. A psychic roar of pure, frustrated rage erupted from the Barad-dûr. He had been tricked. The battle at the gate was a feint, but not the one he had expected. While he had been focused on Aragorn's army, this usurper, had slipped past him and was now making a direct assault on the one place that truly mattered. He could not go himself. His physical form was not yet strong enough, his power still too tied to the fate of his lost ring. But he had guardians. He had servants whose very existence was bound to his will. His will, a shriek of pure, absolute command, lashed out across the plains of Mordor. It found the last of his Nazgûl, the 7 ringwraiths who were circling the battle at the Black Gate like dark vultures, their presence sowing terror and despair among the men of the West. The command was simple, absolute, and filled with a desperate, terrible urgency. Abandon the battle. The ring is on the mountain. The usurper is upon the mountain. Go, go now. Let nothing reach the fire. Slay them all. The 7 Nazgûl did not hesitate. Their war against the men of Gondor was forgotten. They let out a single, unified, piercing shriek that momentarily silenced the din of the battle, and they turned their fell beasts. They became 7 black specks, flying with a desperate, terrifying speed south towards the smoking peak of Mount Doom. They were the last of the 9. They were Sauron's ultimate weapon, his royal guard, his final desperate line of defense. They were being sent not to reclaim the ring, but to perform one final duty, to guard the Sammath Nar, the Chamber of Fire, to the last. They were to be the last guardians of the mountain, the final obstacle that stood between the 2 rival Dark Lords and the ultimate prize. The sky above Orodruin was about to become a battleground for the ages. The slopes of Mount Doom were a treacherous, fiery hellscape. Rivers of molten rock flowed in deep channels down its sides, and the air was a thick, unbreathable soup of sulfur and ash. For Darth Vader and his elite guard of storm goblins, it was an environment as hostile as the vacuum of space. But his armor protected him, and his soldiers' fear of him was greater than their fear of the mountain's fire. They moved with a silent, disciplined speed, a black, armored wedge ascending the volcano. Vader could feel the ring. It was close, so close. A roaring, screaming vortex of pure, ultimate power, just beyond the next ridge. It was then that the sky fell on them. 7 shrieking, black shapes descended from the smoke-choked clouds, the last of the Nazgûl, their fell beasts diving with a suicidal fury. Engage! Vader's voice boomed, and his storm goblins reacted instantly. They did not break, they did not flee. They formed a tight, circular shield wall, their crossbows firing upwards in a single disciplined volley. Black feathered bolts hissed into the sky, but the Nazgûl were not mindless beasts. They weaved and dodged. their mounts' leathery wings carrying them through the volley. They fell upon the small company of goblins like a hurricane of claws and terror. The battle on the fiery slopes was brief and brutal. The storm goblins fought with a desperate, disciplined courage born of absolute terror of their lord. Their pikes and shields held against the first assault. But they were mortals, fighting creatures of myth and shadow. The Nazgûl's aura of despair, multiplied by 7, was a crushing weight. The fell beasts tore through the shield wall, their great jaws snapping, their talons ripping goblins from the ranks. In less than a minute, Vader's elite guard was annihilated, their black armor littering the ashen slopes, their disciplined ranks broken and scattered. Vader now stood alone, a single, black figure surrounded by the 7 remaining ringwraiths and their terrible mounts. They did not attack him at once. They circled him, their unseen eyes filled with a new, intelligent hatred. They had learned from their previous encounters. They knew he was a being of immense physical power. They would not engage him in a simple duel. The lead Nazgûl, now the new commander of the 9, let out a hissing command, and the 7 of them attacked his mind. They did not project a simple aura of fear. They focused their collective will, their millennia of sorrow and malice, into a single, focused psychic assault. They showed him visions of despair, of loss, of the futility of all ambition. They tried to find the cracks in his soul and pour their poison into them. Vader stood unmoving in the center of their circle, his lightsaber unlit. He felt their psychic assault as a cold, irritating pressure. It was a powerful attack, enough to break the will of any king or wizard of this world. But his mind was a fortress forged in the fires of a pain they could not even comprehend. "Your despair is a child's tantrum," his voice boomed, a sound of pure, contemptuous power. "You have not even begun to understand the meaning of suffering." He let his own pain, his own rage, his own absolute, bottomless well of self-hatred rise to the surface. He did not just shield his mind, he counterattacked. He unleashed the full, unrestrained power of the dark side. A wave of pure, black psychic energy erupted from him, a silent, invisible explosion of pure, cold hate. The 7 Nazgûl shrieked as one, a sound of pure, spiritual agony. Their own despair was a shallow pool compared to the ocean of his. They had been trying to poison a creature that was already the living embodiment of poison. Their psychic assault shattered, their concentration broke, and in that moment, Vader ignited his lightsaber. He was no longer a general, he was an executioner. He moved with a speed that was a blur even to their spectral senses. He leaped onto the back of the nearest fell beast, his lightsaber carving the Nazgûl from its saddle. He drove his blade into the creature's skull, and then used its dying body as a platform to launch himself at the next. The fiery slope of Mount Doom became a stage for a terrifying, one-sided slaughter. He was a whirlwind of crimson and black, a master of combat against creatures who had not fought a true physical equal in thousands of years. He used the Force to tear them from the sky, to crush their mounts against the rock, to hold their spectral forms in place as his lightsaber did its grim, purifying work. It was not a duel, it was a purge. The last Nazgûl stood before him on foot, its form flickering, its power broken. It raised the shattered hilt of its sword in a last futile gesture of defiance. Vader did not speak. He simply strode forward and cut it in half. He stood alone on the mountain, the last of Sauron's greatest servants, now a pile of empty robes and scattered dust at his feet. The path to the summit was clear. The final prize was now utterly, completely unguarded. The Samath Nar, the Chamber of Fire, was a place of oppressive, primordial power. A great jagged crack in the floor, the crack of doom, led down into the very heart of the world, a river of molten rock that was the source of the mountain's fire, and the one place the One Ring could be unmade. Samwise Gamgee, his body bruised and his heart pounding, half carried, half dragged his master to the precipice. "Go on, Mr. Frodo," he cried, his voice a hoarse, desperate plea. "Throw it in the fire, end it, now." Frodo stood on the edge of the abyss. He was no longer the cheerful, gentle hobbit from the Shire. He was a pale, gaunt creature, his eyes wide and luminous with a terrible, consuming power. He held the ring in his hand, its gold seeming to burn with a life of its own in the fiery light of the chamber. He had done it. He had reached the end of his quest. All he had to do was open his hand. But the ring's power was now absolute. Its will, which had been a whisper, was now a roaring, undeniable command. It had spent an age trying to return to its master. But here, at the very source of its power, it saw a new, far more appealing opportunity. This bearer, this hobbit, had a will of iron, a resistance unlike any it had ever known. To be destroyed was one fate, but to conquer this unconquerable will, to make this hero of the light its own perfect, eternal slave, that was a victory far sweeter than a simple return to Sauron. Frodo looked from the fire to the ring in his hand, and he made his choice. "I have come," he said, his voice no longer his own, but a clear, cold, and terrible sound that echoed in the fiery chamber. "But I do not choose to do what I have come to do." He turned his back on the fire. He looked at Sam, but his eyes did not see his friend. They saw only a rival. "The ring is mine," he declared. And with a final act of will, he slipped the one ring onto his finger. He did not just vanish. For a single, terrible instant, a column of black, swirling shadow erupted around him, and the entire mountain groaned as if in submission to its new master. The power of the Dark Lord Sauron had just been transferred. In the fields before the Black Gate, Sauron's armies faltered as they felt the shift, a moment of confusion. And in the dark tower of Barad-dûr, the great eye of Sauron, which had been fixed on the battle, now snapped its gaze to Mount Doom. A psychic shriek of pure, absolute, triumphant rage erupted from the tower. His ring. It had been claimed. His victory was at hand. All he had to do was send his last servants, the Nazgûl, to retrieve it from the foolish mortal who had dared to claim it. It was at that exact moment that Darth Vader strode into the Sammath Nar. He had purged the last of the Nazgûl. The path was clear. He had come to claim his prize. He entered the Chamber of Fire, a black, menacing god of order arriving at the heart of chaos. He saw the halfling, the fat one, lying on the ground, weeping. He saw the small footprints leading to the edge of the great fiery chasm. But he saw no ring-bearer. He felt it, though. The power. It was here. A roaring, screaming, triumphant vortex of pure, ultimate dark-side energy. It was the power he had been dreaming of, the key to his own apotheosis. It was so close he could taste it, a taste of ozone and cinnamon, and absolute control, but it was invisible, just beyond his grasp. He had come to the end of all things to claim his prize, only to find it had vanished at the final, critical moment. His patience, his planning, his entire war had led him to this empty, fiery room. The fury that rose in him was a cold, black, and silent nova. The moment Frodo claimed the ring was a cataclysmic event on the spiritual plane. Sauron, from his distant tower, felt the shift in power not as a loss but as a transference. A new vessel had been found for his will, and that vessel was now standing in the one place where the ring's power was absolute. His victory was assured. His eye, a burning orb of pure, triumphant malice, swiveled and fixed its full, undivided attention on the heart of Ord-Druin. The battle at the Black Gate was forgotten, a meaningless sideshow. All that mattered was the prize. It was into this moment of Sauron's absolute focus that Darth Vader arrived. He strode into the Sammath Nar, a figure of black, unyielding purpose, his every sense screaming with the proximity of the ring. The chamber was a furnace, the heat beating against his armor, but he did not feel it. All his being was focused on the source of the power. He saw the pathetic, weeping form of Samwise Gamgee on the ground. He saw the telltale tracks of hobbit feet leading to the precipice of the Crack of Doom, but the ring-bearer himself was gone. Vader stopped. His mechanical breathing was a slow, rhythmic, and deeply menacing sound in the fiery chamber. He did not need his eyes. He could feel the ring's presence. It was here, in this very room, a burning star of pure, concentrated power, so close it made the teeth in his skull ache. It was a nexus of the dark side unlike any he had ever encountered. It was right there, a few feet in front of him, but it was invisible. A low, dangerous growl rumbled in his chest. He had been cheated. At the very last moment, the prize had been veiled from him. He reached out with the force, a tangible, crushing wave of his will. "Show yourself," he boomed, his voice a command that should have shaken the very foundations of the mountain. He felt a resistance, a will, as stubborn and as unyielding as his own, pushed back. It was a small will, a hobbit's will, but it was now amplified 1,000-fold by the power of the ring. It was the will of the new Lord of the Earth. Frodo Baggins, invisible and standing on the edge of the abyss, was no longer a simple hobbit. He was a vessel for the ring's ancient, malevolent power. He felt Vader's presence not as a man but as a rival, a second, colder darkness that had come to steal his new precious and absolute power. And the ring, which had found its perfect, unconquerable new master, would not be taken. Vader saw a flicker in the air, a slight distortion of the heat haze rising from the chasm. He saw a small shifting patch of emptiness where something should be. He had his target. The invisible war was about to begin. The final battle for the One Ring would not be fought between good and evil, but between two utterly different and utterly incompatible forms of darkness. The Chamber of Fire became a silent, invisible battlefield. The air itself grew heavy, a tangible crushing pressure, as two immense opposing wills clashed over the abyss of the crack of doom. Darth Vader stood as a black monolith, his entire being focused on the shimmering, invisible space before him. He could feel the ring-bearer's mind, a small, stubborn point of defiance, now wrapped in the impenetrable, roaring power of the ring. Frodo Baggins, cloaked in the ring's invisibility, was a being of pure, instinctual power. He was no longer Frodo. He was the master of the precious, and his every thought was bent to a single, all-consuming purpose, to protect his newfound treasure from the iron giant that had come to steal it. Vader attacked first. He did not use his lightsaber. This was not a physical contest. He lashed out with the Force, a pure telekinetic shove designed to hurl the invisible hobbit into the fiery chasm. He met a wall, a shimmering, invisible barrier of pure will, the ring's own power, now wielded by Frodo, pushed back. The two forces met in the air between them, creating a silent, concussive shockwave that sent Samwise Gamgee tumbling across the stone floor. "You cannot have it," a voice shrieked. But it was not Frodo's gentle voice. It was a new voice, a high, cold, and terrible sound, the voice of the ring itself, speaking through its new master. "It is mine." Vader growled in frustration. This was unexpected. He had anticipated a simple retrieval. He had not anticipated a fight. He changed tactics. He began to hurl objects. He ripped great jagged chunks of rock from the cavern walls with the Force and sent them hurtling towards the invisible target. Each one was met and deflected in mid-air. Frodo, his mind now a super-powered conduit for the ring's will, reacted with an instinctual perfect defense. The rocks were thrown aside, crashing into the walls and floor of the chamber, which was now beginning to shake and crumble under the strain of the invisible war. Vader pressed his assault. He was a master of combat, of finding a weakness, of creating an opening. But his opponent had no body to strike, no predictable pattern to exploit. It was like fighting a ghost, a poltergeist of immense power. He ignited his lightsaber, its crimson blade a stark, angry slash of color in the fiery gloom. He began to swing, not at a target, but at the feeling of the ring's presence, a series of scything, exploratory arcs through the empty air. He was met with a new form of resistance. The air itself seemed to solidify around his blade, the ring's power slowing his movements, making it feel like he was swinging his lightsaber through thick, heavy water. "Mine," the invisible voice shrieked again. A wave of pure, malevolent force, the ring's own untamed power, erupted from Frodo's position. It was not a push, but an explosion. Vader was thrown back, his armored boots skidding on the stone, his cape whipping around him. He was momentarily stunned. The sheer raw power of the ring, wielded by a being with no training, no discipline, was a chaotic, unpredictable, and terrifying thing. It was like fighting a star that had gained a malevolent intelligence. He realized, with a cold, clear, and utterly infuriating logic, that he could not win this fight, not like this. He could not strike what he could not see. He could not overpower a being who was a living conduit for the greatest source of power in this world. A direct assault was futile. His tactical mind, the mind of a general who had won 100 battles, shifted. If a direct assault was impossible, then an indirect one was required. He needed a different tool, a different weapon. His gaze, cold and analytical, swept across the chamber. He saw the weeping, pathetic form of Samwise Gamgee, a useless distraction. And then he saw it, a small, gnarled, emaciated creature scrambling into the chamber from a side tunnel. Its great pale eyes were fixed on the empty space where Frodo stood, its face a mask of pure, absolute, and all-consuming greed. Gollum. Vader felt the creature's mind. It was a simple, singular thing, a mind that had been hollowed out by one single desire for 500 years. It did not want power. It did not want to rule. It only wanted its precious. And Vader, the master manipulator, the Dark Lord of the Sith, saw his new weapon. He had found his solution. The duel of wills had reached a furious, invisible stalemate. Vader, for all his power and discipline, could not land a decisive blow. Frodo, for all the ring's immense chaotic power, could not drive the Iron Lord from the chamber. They were two gods, locked in a battle over the soul of the world, and neither could gain an advantage. It was a problem of physics. Vader was a point of focused, directed force. Frodo was a source of explosive radial energy. It was a spear against a bomb. Vader's cold, tactical mind, utterly devoid of any morality or honor, saw the solution not as a man, but as a weapon system identifies a target of opportunity. Gollum was not a creature to be dismissed. He was a tool, a guided missile of pure, unadulterated malice, and his target was locked. Gollum scrambled into the Samath Nar, his senses on fire. The precious. It was here. He could feel it, so close. His entire wretched being was focused on the shimmering, invisible space on the edge of the abyss. Precious, precious, he shrieked, his voice a sound of pure, agonized longing. He began to crawl towards it, a starved animal drawn to the scent of meat. Vader watched him. He saw the creature's singular, all-consuming obsession. He saw that Gollum's senses, unlike his own, were perfectly attuned to the ring. He did not see an empty space. He saw his precious. He knew exactly where it was. Vader did not need to see. He only needed to aim. He reached out with the force, not with a crushing, powerful blow, but with a gentle, precise, and utterly irresistible grip. He seized Gollum. The wretched creature was lifted from the floor, his limbs flailing, a look of shocked, terrified confusion on his face. "No, not us. He's not the one," he shrieked, thinking this new, terrible power was a servant of Frodo. Vader ignored his cries. He held the creature suspended in the air for a moment, a living projectile in his telekinetic grasp. He felt for the precise location of the ring-bearer, a burning, invisible point of power. He felt Gollum's own mind, a beacon of pure, focused desire, straining towards that same point. The two were perfectly aligned. He did not need to aim with his eyes. He had a targeting system with 500 years of obsessive homing instinct. "You have served your purpose," Vader's voice boomed, though the words were not for Gollum, but for the invisible hobbit who was about to be broken. And with a single, precise, and brutally efficient telekinetic hurl, he threw Gollum. Gollum became a living missile, a gnarled, screaming projectile of pure, malicious intent. He flew through the air, his trajectory perfect, his every instinct, now amplified and guided by Vader's own will, focused on the one thing he wanted more than life itself. Frodo, his senses overwhelmed by his invisible duel with Vader, did not see it coming. He felt a sudden, sharp impact, a bony, wiry body crashing into his own invisible form. The two of them, the ring-bearer and his own dark, corrupted past, crashed to the stone floor in a tangle of invisible limbs and gnarled, desperate claws. The stalemate was broken. The final, bloody act had begun. The collision was a shock to Frodo's system, breaking his concentration, shattering his connection to the ring's absolute power. For a moment he was just a hobbit again, invisible but tangible, wrestling on the floor with a creature of pure, desperate madness. "Precious, give it to us," Gollum shrieked, his teeth and claws finding their mark on the invisible form. He was not fighting a man. He was fighting for his own soul, and he fought with the strength of the damned. Frodo cried out in pain and terror. He tried to push the creature away, but Gollum's wiry strength, fueled by a lifetime of obsession, was immense. The two of them rolled on the very edge of the crack of doom, a desperate, pathetic, and utterly pivotal struggle for the fate of the world. Vader stood back, a silent, black observer. His part in this was done. He had introduced a chaotic, unpredictable variable into the equation. Now, he would simply watch the results and claim the prize from the victor. Samwise Gamgee, who had been watching the impossible invisible duel in horror, now saw a fight he could understand. He saw a gnarled, evil creature seemingly wrestling with the empty air, and he heard his master's cries of pain. "Get away from him, you stinker," Sam roared, and with a courage he did not know he possessed, he charged, his small sword held high. He brought the hilt of his sword down on Gollum's head, but the creature, in its frenzy, barely seemed to notice. It was all happening in seconds. Gollum, his own mind now as strong as the ring's pull, lunged for Frodo's hand, the hand that wore the ring. And he bit. There was a terrible, tearing sound, and a cry of pure, absolute agony from the invisible Frodo. Gollum scrambled back, and in his hand he held a single bloody finger. And on that finger, gleaming with a triumphant, fiery light, was the one ring. Frodo reappeared, collapsing to the ground, his hand a bloody ruin, the spell of the ring's power broken. Gollum rose to his feet on the precipice of the abyss. He held his prize aloft. He had done it. After all the long, dark, lonely years, his precious was his again. "Precious," he cried, his voice a sound of pure, triumphant, ecstatic joy. He began to dance, a mad, shuffling jig of victory on the very edge of doom. "Precious, my precious." He took a single, joyful, celebratory step backward. His foot found only empty air. For a single, silent, eternal moment, he hung there, his eyes wide with a final, comical look of surprise. Then he fell. He fell into the fiery heart of the crack of doom, a single plummeting figure, his eyes fixed on the one thing he had ever loved. "Precious," his voice cried out one last time, a sound that was swallowed by the roar of the fire. The ring, held aloft in his hand, fell with him. It hit the surface of the molten rock. For a moment, it glowed, its golden form resisting, the ancient letters of its inscription burning with a final, defiant fire. And then, it was gone. The mission was complete. The quest was over. The ring was destroyed. The destruction of the One Ring was not a silent event. It was a psychic and physical detonation that tore the heart out of the world's evil. A psychic scream, a sound of pure, absolute, and final agony, erupted from the dark tower of Barad-dûr. It was the death cry of a god, Sauron the Great, the Dark Lord of Mordor. His essence, his power, his very being inextricably bound to the fate of the ring, was unmade. His will, which had held his empire together for thousands of years, was extinguished in a single silent instant. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The great eye, the fiery, malevolent, lidless eye at the pinnacle of the dark tower, which had been fixed in triumph on Mount Doom, wavered. It constricted in a spasm of agony, and then it exploded, a silent outward blast of fire and shadow that was seen from 100 leagues away. The Tower of Barad-dûr itself, a structure held together not just by stone but by the will of its master, lost its foundation. With a deep, groaning, world-shaking sound, the dark fortress, the symbol of the world's fear for an entire age, collapsed in on itself, a waterfall of black stone and shattered iron that disappeared into a cloud of dust. At the Black Gate, the armies of Mordor, their wills no longer bound to the singular, commanding purpose of their master, were broken. Their courage, their hate, their very reason for being, vanished. They became what they had always been, a chaotic, terrified mob. They threw down their weapons and they fled, or they turned on each other in a final pointless orgy of violence. The ground of Mordor itself, a land whose very substance was infused with the evil of its lord, began to break apart. Great, gaping chasms opened up, swallowing the fleeing orc armies. The foundations of the world were being cleansed. And on Mount Doom, the end was a beginning. The destruction of the ring unleashed a cataclysm. The volcano, its purpose fulfilled, its dark heart unmade, erupted, not with a simple flow of lava, but with a final, world-shaking explosion. In the Sammath Naur, Darth Vader stood on the precipice, a silent, black witness to the end of all things. He had felt the psychic scream of his rival's death. He had felt the ultimate power, the prize he had come for, be annihilated. He had won. He had achieved his ultimate goal. He had defeated the Dark Lord of this world. And in doing so, he had lost everything. The very tool he had intended to use to forge his new empire was now a memory, a wisp of smoke in a river of fire. His victory was a thing of ash and dust. The mountain began to collapse around him. The floor of the chamber cracked. The ceiling rained fire and rock. The river of lava in the chasm below began to rise, a tide of pure, world-breaking fire. He turned to leave, his face an impassive black mask that hid the cold, black nova of his fury. His purpose in this world, the grand destiny he had seen for himself, had just been stolen from him by a fool's luck and the desperate greed of a wretched, pathetic creature. He saw the two halflings, the true unwitting architects of his failure, clinging to a rock surrounded by the rising lava, about to be consumed by the fire. For a moment, he considered leaving them to their fate, a small petty act of vengeance, but that was not his way. Their life or death was an irrelevance to him now. With a contemptuous, almost bored gesture of the Force, he lifted the rock they were clinging to and sent it flying out of the chamber's entrance, to a place of relative safety on the mountainside. It was not an act of mercy, it was an act of dismissal. They were no longer of any consequence. He turned and strode from the chamber, a dark king abandoning his empty, broken throne room as the world ended and began anew all around him. Darth Vader survived the eruption of Mount Doom. While the mountain tore itself apart, he strode calmly down its fiery slopes, a shield of the Force turning aside the falling rocks and the rivers of fire. He was an island of cold, disciplined purpose in a world of chaotic, fiery rebirth. He walked through the ruins of Mordor, a land now being cleansed by the very fires that had forged it, and he did not look back. The world was saved. The great dark shadow of Sauron was gone forever. The army of the West, snatched from the jaws of annihilation at the Black Gate, was victorious. The great eagles came, they rescued the hobbits, and the age of men began with a song and a sunrise. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, was crowned King Elessar, and the fourth age of Middle-earth began under a banner of peace and renewed hope. The world, scarred and wounded, began to heal. But the world was not truly free. A second, colder and now utterly aimless shadow remained. Vader returned to his fortress of Moria. His journey was a silent, grim pilgrimage through a world that was now celebrating its freedom, a freedom he saw as a chaotic, sentimental weakness. He returned to his throne of black stone in the fiery heart of the mountain. His legions of storm goblins, their wills no longer bound by the amplifying power of the ring, were now held in his sway by fear alone. They were a lesser army now, but they were still an army. His forges still burned. His fortress was still impregnable. But his purpose was gone. The ring, the key to his own apotheosis, the tool with which he would have forged this primitive galaxy into a perfect shining jewel of his empire, was destroyed. His grand, glorious vision had turned to ash in a volcano's fire. He was a conqueror with nothing left to conquer that truly mattered. He was a king of a kingdom of goblins and rock, a petty tyrant in a world he had intended to rule as a god. His rage did not fade. It simply cooled. It solidified. It turned from a burning star into a black hole, a thing of immense, patient, and eternal gravity. He did not abandon this world. To be trapped here was his new reality. He accepted it with the cold, hard pragmatism of a Sith Lord. He would not be its savior. He would not be its conqueror. He would be its shadow. From his dark throne in Moria, he began a new, long watch. He would observe the rising kingdom of men. He would watch this new King Elessar, this noble, hopeful fool, try to build his new world of freedom and choice. He would watch them make their mistakes, fall into their petty squabbles, and inevitably, he knew, they would begin to desire the very order and strength that he alone could provide. He had eternity to wait. He was a patient, dark god on a lonely throne, a king in exile from a galaxy that was lost to him. The Iron Lord of Moria was no longer a hunter. He was a ghost, a legend, a dark, cautionary tale that the new age of men would tell their children. A permanent, terrifying, and utterly patient shadow, waiting for the world to grow tired of its own freedom, waiting for the moment to rise again and offer them his own, perfect and terrible peace. The War of the Ring was over, but the war for the soul of Middle-earth would never truly end.